Thanks for following our Leading Voices series. I'm here today with Peter O'Neill, Senior Consultant at Carney, Sandoe & Associates. Peter is a seasoned expert with head of school searches and executive coaching. He's a 30-year long-term head and interim head for 6 different schools. Peter, thank you for joining us today.
Good to see you, Jonathan. Happy to be here.
Yeah, wonderful to see you as well. So 2 questions for you around leadership. As a head of school, what would independent school leaders need to consider when leading during challenging times such as COVID? Could you talk about that for a minute or two?
I think, Jonathan, where I start with is that although we have upwards of 24 former heads of school at Carney, Sandoe & Associates representing hundreds of years of experience, not one of us has 1 year of experience with what heads of school are facing right now. So this is an entirely new landscape to navigate. And so we start with that. And I think one of the things that I would counsel heads about is as we move into what I think is now an approaching post-pandemic period, is that you keep emphasizing that because it's not going to get that much easier in the post-pandemic. There'll be new challenges there. So that's first and foremost in terms of experience to offer. Second, I think this is not a test of IQ, of leadership, intelligence, or strategic thinking. This is a test of EQ, of emotional intelligence.
Makes sense.
To get through this successfully. By that I mean the ability to have empathy and to connect with your community and with individuals, and for them to know that you truly feel that. You can't hide it. If you don't feel as if you have empathy, find people in your community who do, and go through them, or acknowledge that it's hard for you to feel those things, but acknowledge that this is very difficult. Acknowledge the feelings as genuine and real, and don't say, well, I'll just get over it. People are not going to get over this. They're going to get through it, but they're not going to get over it. So that's another, I think, lesson, that this is a test of EQ, of your emotional intelligence. Now that we're moving into what I think is a post-pandemic period, this is going to call upon some strategic thinking. I'm fond of a book called Governance as Leadership by Richard Chape. It talks about 3 levels of leadership between a head and particularly a board of trustees. And they are the fiduciary responsibility, the strategic, and then what he calls a generative, which I'll get to in a second, which is a little messy. On the fiduciary side, as some of the lessons from 08-09 for us, don't waste a crisis. This has been a crisis. Don't waste what you've learned in this crisis. On the fiduciary side, most schools have added enormous expenses to be able to address to this. One school where I was privileged to be a head as an interim added $3 million of expense to their budget. What schools will have to be careful about is taking out as much of that as possible and not have it become a recurring expense that gets built into these budgets. For instance, can you do things more economically now in a post-pandemic period?
Great point.
What would it look like going forward in a post-pandemic period? That's the fiduciary. Strategic is, how do we adjust to the post-pandemic? Are the enrollment figures that we've been seeing, either on the increase side for many schools, going to be sustained? And if so, how do we sustain them? How do we remarket ourselves post-pandemic? It's not just that, oh, your child can have classes in person. What is the value added an independent school offer in the post-pandemic period? I think the third and most important one is generative, and Chape says it's asking questions to which you don't have answers. So the questions I'd be asking with the board would be, what have we learned? How is education going to be done differently? And what does that mean for our school and how we deliver education? How will people be working differently, both our parents and our faculty? What are the lessons learned that we can apply in a generative way to schools in a post-pandemic period?
Wonderful. Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us. And what's the best way for our viewers to reach you? Is it to go to the Carney Sandoe website, or should they email you directly?
Yeah, Carney Sandoe website, and my email is peter.o'neill with 2 L's at carneysandoe.com.
Super. Well, thank you again for joining us, and you have a relaxing summer as well as you take some time to recharge, Peter.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You as well. Take care.